The Human Self and Iblees. Translation of Iblees O Adam. Translated and edited. Dr. Ejaz Rasool, UK. The Quranic concept of Satan and perspective on human desires, emotions, intellect and wahi. Author. Ghulam Ahmad Parwez. 8 Wahi. Revelation. Though man had descended into the valley of humanity, he became subdued on seeing the colossal forces of Iblees which were ready to confront and resist at each and every step. Such a terrifying and frightening valley, and he completely alone. The struggles of life so life-threatening, and he without any means and resources. At the thought of the oncoming dangers his heart sank, his legs began to quake with fear and terror. In this terrifying environment he surveyed all around but saw no supporter and helper. His pleading eyes lifted upwards and becoming totally filled with supplication, collided against a high and mighty canopy. The supplicant beseeched in this way, and the one who answers blessed him with his mercy of Rububiyyat in such a way that thousands of paradises of peace and tranquility could make an abode in his anxious heart, and declared, "And so lose not heart, nor fall into despair, you will be superior if you are Momineen." 3. 139. Why are you apprehensive and why do you fear? You are the highest of all in the world, but the technique to reach this height is. And if, as is sure, there comes to you guidance from me, whosoever follows my guidance, on him shall be no fear, nor shall they grieve. 2. 38. Do not think that you have been left alone in this abode of darkness. The eternal light of the radiant flame is with you, so why do you fear? All of the forces of Iblees provoking quaking with fear and discouragement on one side, and in order to counter them, the guidance of Allah on the other side. After this, man did not require any other thing. This question whether man can be his own guide in the struggle of life in order to confront opposing forces, or if there is also the need for an external light for his guidance, is a very important and fundamental one, and has been continuing as the focus of attention for those who think and reflect. Before reaching this point, it is essential to explain a few initial stages. Before the real discussion commences, it should also be understood that the whole basis of religion is on the belief in Wahi. There is no doubt in this that acceptance of Allah is an acknowledgement of a truth. But the great aim for which it is essential to have Iman in Allah is fulfilled only through Wahi. This is because the guidance of Allah is only received via Wahi, and this is that very guidance by which man can accomplish the eminence of humanity. As a result of living life under the obedience of the laws of Allah. Therefore, whichever individual has Iman in Allah in the true sense, it is necessary for him to also accept Wahi. The truth is that our and Allah's connection is established solely through Wahi. If there is no Wahi, then we can never know what Allah is and what his relationship is with mankind. This is the reason that it is not demanded of us that we know, recognize Allah. The requirement is that have Iman in him through the Wahi which he has sent down. The meaning of Wahi is that law or code according to which mankind ought to live life. This code or law is not a creation or proposition of the human intellect, rather it is out with the human intellect and is received from Allah himself. The predicament is that Western education has imprisoned our mentality within the four walls of the material world to such a degree that it is with great difficulty that it accepts any other world beyond the domain of matter. Up until the end of the 19th century, the concept of Western scientists regarding the universe was mechanical, in which there was no room for any belief out with matter. Having been rejected, that concept departed some time ago from the institutions of philosophy of Europe. Yet the minds among us are continuing to be influenced by this very same concept. Therefore, it is essential that in order to satisfy them the latest researches and concepts of the philosophers and scientific scholars of Europe are brought to attention. and it can be seen whether Iman in Wahi is contrary to knowledge and reason. 8.11 Fundamental question. First of all, we have to see whether there is even any question. Problem. Before mankind which he requires to solve from the point of view of being human. It is obvious that there is no such question facing any other species. In the process of evolution, the link in the chain below man is that of the animals. Their life is merely a physical life, the satisfaction of whose needs and requirements is their objective of life, and all of this happens in a mechanical fashion in their life. When they have obtained food and drink, or at the most, have the satisfaction of safety and protection from imminent danger, then all problems of life are solved. After this, there is no requirement for any effort which could become the cause for disturbance of their peaceful existence. There is no piercing inquisitiveness which could be the cause for disquietude in their internal peace. There is nothing secret and hidden, no obsession to unveil which is keeping them disconcerted and in pursuit. There is no mystery or riddle, for which the demand to know their reality and nature hinders the peace of the day and the sleep of their night. But is it possible that this can be the condition of man too? Is it possible that his matters of life are confined to just eating, drinking and sleeping? Look inside yourself and question your heart, and raise your eyes and inquire from the history of humanity. And then see what the domain of the human self and the universe say about this. There is no doubt in this that one part of human life is under physical laws in the same way as for animals. Up to this level, human life is at the level of animal life. But human life is not only at an animal level, it is also higher than this. As has been written in the topic on Adam, this level is the level of human life. Up to the animal level, he also has no question before him. But the moment he rises above animal life, and reaches human life, an amazing revolution occurs in his world. Having reached here, his satisfaction does not ensue by merely eating a mango, but after this he also endeavors to count the trees. What is it? Why is it? How is it? And how should it be? These conundrums keep creating agitation in his heart. Cast another look at the story of Adam. This reality will become crystal clear before you. His initial life, which had not yet tasted the pleasure of the unease of inquisitiveness, was only this. We said, O Adam, dwell you and your wife in the garden, and eat of the bountiful things therein as, where and when, you will. 2:35. It is as if, in this era of infancy, the demands of life were no more than merely eating and drinking. This was Adam's era of water and clay. This was merely a kneaded dough which was not yet shaped into the human form. This was the childhood of his desires. There was no thorn in his heart, nor any prick of this thorn. There was no pain, nor the feeling of pain. But having reached the age of adulthood, how could the toys of childhood entertain his heart? Now the world of demands was novel, the world of desires was different. Now the perpetual desire was to see the covered reality unveiled before him, so that beauty becomes manifested in its full glory and display. If you cast an eye on the history of mankind, in every era and nation man will be seen to be in pursuit of some unresolved conundrum. His mind's efforts to unravel the secrets of nature, the pursuit and endeavor of his intellect to understand and resolve world matters. Reflection and contemplation on everything. Concern and attention in every matter and war and confrontation against his environment. Peering into the world of stars, sometimes a desire even beyond this to get lost in the depths of the infiniteness of space. Sometimes a fervor within the world of his heart to achieve some unknown desire. So much so, that in the domain of thoughts and ideas, his continuous struggle and persistent pursuit is a reflection of this desire and effort which is causing turmoil within the world of his heart and mind in the resolution of some question. 8.2 What is that question? We need to see what is that question. Though the details of this issue are very extensive, in order for guidance to the actual truth, let us turn our gaze towards another finer aspect of the story of Adam. Have you perceived what it was that Iblees said which enticed Adam? What spell was it that he breathed into his ear, so that forgetting everything, he followed him? It is obvious that it must have been some matter which had been agitating in the depths of his heart, which must have been appearing before his eyes as an intense desire and disappearing as a disappointment. Sensing his great desire and angst, Iblees took advantage of this vulnerable aspect of his and conveyed through the eyes only, "Come, that which you are in search of, I will disclose its secret to you." What was the desire of man? What did Iblees say to make him follow him? The Quran has explained this in a few words. It is stated in Surah Taha. Iblees said, "O Adam, shall I lead you to the tree of eternity and to a kingdom that never decays?" 120. Have you perceived what this desire was in the human heart? To live forever and an immortal life. Man wishes to live forever. The desire to have eternal life dwells in the depths of his heart. This is that question which is before him from day one. This is that conundrum, the search of whose solution has made him so fiery like the blazing embers from a horseshoe. Regarding Iblees, we have seen that he is the display of an unbridled intellect. The basis of his declaration of refusal was on this intellectual argument that I am better than he. You did create me from fire and him from clay. 7:12. Because of this, why should I bow down before him? And having considered this intellectual logic of his to be the final word, he regarded the state of wisdom of the one who had created him from fire, and Adam from clay, to be nothing compared with his own intellectual reasoning. This is what is known as unbridled intellect. The desire in the heart of man for immortal life and to live forever is legitimate and justified. But the means by which to achieve it, which was advocated by the unchecked intellect, was entirely wrong and misleading, and its consequence was debasement and decline. Everything he had told him, the Quran has referred to it in one word. And so their sexual consciousness became awakened. 121. Iblees whispered this spell into his ear that immortal life can be achieved through procreation. The dying father sees the continuity of his life in the reflection of the life of his son. He dies contented and happy, thinking that the legacy of my name and the name of my family continues in the world. My lamp is burning, the branch of the tree of my life is continuing to grow forward. From this he gains satisfaction that I will remain alive forever, and he obtains gratification of the desire for immortal life from this. But the Quran states that this is a deception of Iblees. This is a deceit of the unconstrained intellect. Assuming this to be immortal life is stagnation and decline. If this is what immortal life is, then this is available to every species of animal which has produced the ability to promote its own breed by confronting an unfavorable physical environment. Cow, buffalo, sheep, goat, camel, horse, these have been in existence in this world perhaps before even man, and their species is continuously moving forward. The meaning of this kind of immortal life is that there is no distinction whatsoever between a human being and an animal. In fact, from one aspect, man even falls one level below animals because through procreation he keeps producing his own enemies, one individual in pursuit of the life of another individual. One nation in pursuit of the destruction of another nation. With enmity between yourselves. 2:36. Such wedges become fixed between different individuals as a consequence of which one individual becomes alienated from another individual, due to which the universal brotherhood of man disintegrates into pieces. Furthermore, the meaning of the concept of immortality through race is that man is merely a link in the mechanical process of animal evolution, and his life is merely a physical life. Hence, the issue before him is only this: how physical needs and requirements should be fulfilled, and how to compete and gain supremacy over other peoples and nations in this. It is apparent that this issue is related to the physical world, therefore its solution is also within the sphere of the physical world, i.e., the domain of the intellect. Thus, those who regard this to be the only human issue neither acknowledge human life to be anything more than a physical life, nor are they convinced of the need for any light of guidance other than the human intellect. In today's terminology, consider the name for this path of thinking and pattern of life to be a materialistic concept. Contrary to this, the Creator of the universe has informed us that this concept is wrong. The solution for the fear which man has about being annihilated and for the sorrow which is tormenting him about being eliminated is not within the capability of perceptive knowledge. Intellect. This is because man is also something beyond a physical being and visible entity. For this it is essential that he should be aware of the secret of life and that he can comprehend reality. He should understand this supreme secret that life, in both its length and breadth, is one indivisible unit. In length, in this way that the perpetually flowing stream of life continues to flow even after death. And in breadth, in this way that the creation and nourishment of the whole of mankind takes place just like for a single individual. But comprehension of these matters is not within the realm of the human intellect. For this, there is the need for an external light just like the need for sunlight for the eye. It is apparent that this mode of thinking is completely different from the kind of outlook which sees life purely at an animal level. These two styles of thinking are two distinctly separate foundations on which the edifices of two different civilizations arise. It is clear that before examining any system of thought and social setup, it is necessary to look at the basis and foundation on which that system is established. The system which considers only the physical life of man to be the objective and ultimate end. No matter how bright and glittering its results may be in the physical domain, they can never be a cause for satisfaction for that group which considers man to be something more than just his physical being, and whose aim is that man's physical life and the life beyond the physical one should both be eminent and prosperous. The question before us is this: whether man is merely the name for a form of water and clay, or is he also something beyond this? And is the secret of life and the grasp of reality possible for the human intellect on its own? i.e., comprehension by man of his own reality and the reality of the universe. In the coming pages an effort will be made to present details of this issue and a solution to this question. 8.3 Knowledge of things. The secret of human prestige and eminence lies in knowledge. Hence, only knowledge can be that medium through which he can grasp reality. But the question is, what kind of knowledge is it as a result of which he can turn this possibility into a reality? If we cast an eye on the domain of knowledge, then first and foremost before us comes the knowledge of discernible things. This is that same knowledge which has been termed as Allama. Knowledge of defining through names. In the story of Adam, as we will learn a bit further on, the word asma is so comprehensive that the entire world of tangible things and concepts becomes condensed within it. In the domain of tangible things it is not possible to have knowledge of anything until its concept forms in your mind. And it is not possible to have a concept of something until a name has been assigned to it. This is why knowledge of traits or knowledge of things is, in reality, conceptual knowledge. From this knowledge man can obtain awareness about the perceptible and visible aspect of the universe. Hence, the world of this knowledge is confined to the domain of the human senses i.e., He obtains perceptual knowledge about the things of the universe from whatever data the human senses convey to him. And the concepts which his mind forms from the mutual synergy of the various aspects of this perceptual knowledge are known as conceptual knowledge. For man, this knowledge is also not in any way less worthy of eminence and distinction. The conquest of the physical world is based on this knowledge. It is this very knowledge which has taken man out of the caves and conferred on him the finer details of the expanse of the heavens. It is also the case that not only has man been provided with the senses, but along with these has also been bestowed with the power of reasoning and discernment. Intellect. 8.4 Human intellect. The duty of the power of intellect is critical analysis, i.e., whatever knowledge is provided by its information relaying agencies. By analyzing this through reasoning within its limits, the intellect makes a comparison between right and wrong. The gaze shows that there is a man sitting on the moon. The intellect analyzes this information, and reaches this conclusion through reasoning that there cannot be a man on it. This is a deception of the vision. Or we see smoke rising at a distance, and the intellect decides that there is a fire beneath it. In this way, after drawing inferences from the components, the human intellect arrives at an effect from a cause. Knowledge, and together with it the analytical force of the intellect, is a distinguished hallmark of a human being. Establishing principles through experiences and observations. Obtaining work from the things of the universe in the light of these principles and then carrying forward the outcomes from all of these is all because of this force. Whatever assets man attains from his forefathers have been collected due to this same force. It is because of this that it is preserved, and it is through this means that it is also transferred on. His valuable possession of cultural and societal assets continues to multiply daily on the basis of the power of intellect and reasoning. Philosophy, history, biology, astronomy, chemistry, physics, metaphysics, psychology, economics, political science, planning, etc. In other words, the ancient and modern sciences and crafts of the discernible world are the intriguing manifestations of intelligence and vision. Wisdom and reasoning, brainstorming and reflection, consciousness and value analysis. Hence, who can deny the greatness of the force of intellect? 8.5 Can human intellect comprehend reality? But despite this greatness and distinction of the human intellect, the question arises whether the intellect can grasp that reality which we have referred to in the beginning, and which is the focal point and center of gravity of this discussion of ours. Can it provide a solution to this question which has caused a state of confusion and perturbation in the human heart? As has been noted earlier, the domain of the intellect, or philosophical knowledge, is the domain of tangibles. Hence, firstly we need to see what is the state of intellectual discoveries in the physical world, which is another name for the world of those things that are perceptible. Have human investigations in this domain been able to acquire knowledge of the reality of things? The world of physics is about matter. Up until the end of the 19th century, it was generally viewed among the world of scientists that this universe is lying in the vastness of space like a dead entity, and that there is a mechanical process in it which is functioning and continuing as a result of a few laws which are brought into play by blind nature. Up until yesterday, this research was considered to be among the established facts of science. The influence of this mechanistic concept of the universe was prevalent throughout the world of European thought. But at the beginning of the 20th century, signs of a great revolution began to appear in the world of science of Europe, which within a period of a few years shook the foundations of materialism and the mechanistic concept of the universe. Firstly, the direction of research turned towards this, that the thing which we call solid and inert matter is neither solid nor inert, nor is it even matter, according to its common terminology. Instead it is a collection of electrons which are constantly circling in motion, and it is obvious that electricity is nothing other than energy. 8.6 What is matter? Current research regarding matter is that all matter is merely a form of energy. In reality, the concept of any solidity and materialism in anything is ultimately wrong. Whatever exists is merely energy. According to this doctrine, the world of matter becomes declared as being non-matter in reality. Energy does not even fall anywhere in the definition of matter. Therefore, the reality of the universe now is not matter, but is considered to be beyond matter. This was what Sir James Jeans had said in his book, that the universe is the sealed waves of light. But moving forward from even this, the theory of relativity by Einstein has produced a further revolution in this concept. His theory of time and space is an extremely complex technical problem, but according to the established view of this doctrine, in the words of Bertrand Russell, it is sufficient to understand this much. The theory of relativity by merging time into space-time has damaged the traditional notion of substance more than all the arguments of the philosophers. Matter, for common sense, is something which persists in time and moves in space. But for modern relativity physics this view is no longer tenable. A piece of matter has become not a persistent thing with varying states, but a system of interrelated events. The old solidity has gone, and with it the characteristics that to the materialist made matter seem more real than fleeting thoughts. This means that according to the research of Einstein, matter is not some entity which has a solid and static state. Instead it is a collection of a few interrelated events, or condensed thoughts, whose reality is movement or energy. Therefore, the science of physics has turned all things into movement. The universe, which appears as a collection of things, is not a solid thing which is existing in the space. This is not a thing at all, but is an act or a construct of events. Just imagine what a supreme change has taken place in the domain of physics regarding the basis and fundamentals of the universe by the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. This is that innovation due to which science has acknowledged its own errors of judgment. 8.7 Concept of the universe. And now, because of this, instead of matter, the concept of spiritualism has been declared to be the aim of the universe. So that same science which up until the end of the 19th century was conveying the European world towards pure materialism as a result of the mechanistic concept of the universe, is now bringing it to beyond matter through its own research, i.e., a spiritual concept of the universe. According to Bacon, the truth is, a little knowledge of philosophy makes a man an atheist, but after delving down into its depths, man absolutely emerges religious. Now let us peruse another aspect of research. The renowned philosopher Berkeley was of the view that those things that we obtain knowledge of via our senses, their existence is not external, they are constructs of our mind. For example, a flower appears to you to be red, but that redness is not present within the flower. Instead, waves of light establish a certain effect on the mind of the observer from which he obtains the perception of the color red. It is apparent from this that the knowledge about things which is obtained through our senses is in reality a deception of the vision. 8.8 The reality of things. Professor Eddington, in his brief but very comprehensive lecture, Science and the Unseen World, Chapter 3, has discussed this alluring deception in a very compelling manner. He writes, "We are all suffering from this deception that reaching into the depths of the human self is in any case impossible, but that the reality of matter can be easily comprehended. But just think, how do we obtain knowledge about the reality of matter? This is what happens. Is it not that some influence emerges from a material thing, and it strikes against some extreme corner of our nervous system? As a result of this, some physical and chemical changes take place within us which reach our brain through nerve fibers. On reaching there, a mystery appears, i.e., an image of an idea or a state of sensation is produced in the human mind which is different from the movement or drive which took place in our nervous system. In other words, our nerves had taken one effect from this and a different effect was perceived by our mind. Whatever consequence is taken from this effect is what is called knowledge of this thing. We can say whatever we like about this knowledge, but this much is certainly clear that this knowledge cannot, in any event, be knowledge about the reality and actuality of the thing concerned. This is because the reality and actuality of this thing simply cannot reach the human mind via nerve fibers. Only those effects can be transferred through the nerves which they had deduced. From these effects we can infer one conclusion. Therefore, this extracted or inferred knowledge is a reflection of the form of matter, not its reality. This is the reason that knowledge about material things is described through symbols and pointers. And it is obvious that symbols are only used when the reality of something is not known, as in algebra, when the use of the symbol x becomes a substitution for an unknown quantity. The human mind keeps registering these symbols. By registering one kind of symbols repeatedly, the image established by them becomes reinforced, but this image has no connection with the reality of the actual thing. Hence, we cannot obtain knowledge of reality from these symbols, just as we cannot obtain knowledge of the reality of a broadcasting station from the broadcasted voices emanating from it. Today, if you ask some physicist what he has researched ultimately about ether or electrons, his answer will not be one such as would confer information about a chair or a table. Instead, he will itemize a few symbols and a few mathematical equations. Now, if he is asked, what are these symbols actually? The reply received from him will be that the knowledge of physics has nothing to do with this. This knowledge possesses no such means by which it can reach the depths of the actual reality beneath these symbols. In the world of physics, only knowledge of these symbols and equations can be obtained, but not of that nature whose manifestation these symbols are. Bear these explanations in mind and then ponder to what extent, leaving aside the invisible and metaphysical domain, knowledge of the reality of the physical world itself can be achieved through intellect. Knowledge based on reasoning. And what can science declare definitively and with certainty about its discovered outcomes? This is the very reason that in Europe itself their renowned thinkers are gradually reaching this conclusion. That the comprehension of reality is not possible through knowledge of the physical world. The conclusion which Sir James Jeans has reached following a very knowledgeable discussion on the issue of the universe is this. And with this reflection before us, we may well conclude by adding, what might well have been interlined into every paragraph, that everything that has been said, and every conclusion that has been tentatively put forward, is quite frankly speculative and uncertain. We have tried to discuss whether present-day science has anything to say on certain difficult questions, which are perhaps set forever beyond the reach of human understanding. We cannot claim to have discerned more than a very faint glimmer of light at the best. Perhaps it was wholly illusory, for certainly we had to strain our eyes very hard to see anything at all. So that our main contention can hardly be that the science of today has a pronouncement to make. Perhaps it ought rather to be that science should leave off making pronouncements. The river of knowledge has too often turned back on itself. Professor of Physics, Dr. James Arnold Crowther of Reading University, writes, "Nature is so wonderful in her deep fundamental simplicities that the last word of science on any topic may perhaps be left for the last man." In this same book, Dr. Atkin, an expert on astronomy and director of the California Observatory, astounded by the mesmerizing display of the stellar world, writes, We know nothing about the beginning and the end of the universe. Sir Francis Younghusband writes in his article, "Whatever we can determine from science is only this much, that the ocean of knowledge has no boundary. We can only know that we will never be able to know everything about nature." These were the scholars of physics. Now let us hear from the lips of a scholar of history. Professor Alfred Cockburn had written a book, in 1942, on the decline and disintegration of Western civilization, in which he had discussed all the elements which are constituents of this civilization, and then described how the condition for disorder was concealed within the construction of this civilization. Discussing the world of science, he writes, "A scientific law is a working hypothesis. It is a form of observed natural phenomena, but we cannot suppose that ultimate truth has been attained even in the limited field of science, until the whole of the phenomenal world is known." Regarding reason, the opinion of the professor is, reason, indeed, has of late years fallen so far out of favor, that now it seems to be regarded as the mere obsolete superstition of a few deluded metaphysicians. Further on, he writes, "The distinguishing mark of our period is that from all directions reason and rationalism have been assailed. Science has led the way in the assault on the fortress of reason. The discoveries of modern mathematics have brought back the mystery of the universe, reason. As a result of the opening up of a whole new field of knowledge by the psychologists, is no longer regarded as the only, or even as the dominant characteristic of the human mind. A final blow to the law of reason has come from the analysis of ideologies. As Dr. Karl Mannheim has shown, modern thinkers have gradually become aware that ideas cannot be divorced from the social and historical background in which they exist. This is the reality of that intellect which only a few days previously was being worshipped in Europe. And by becoming impressed with it, the enslaved mind of the East was embarrassed to present before their philosophers and thinkers an ideology which was beyond the realm of intellect, or to express his iman in it. Today, these same admirers, the Europeans, have demolished this idol into pieces with their own hands. But the state of our slavish mentality is such that we are gathering these scattered pieces one by one, so that by joining them we can install this idol once again in the Kaaba of our heart. This is the limitation of the intellect. Hence, in the way that the one who possesses sight and a blind man are both equal beyond the limits of human sight, similarly, beyond the limits of intellect, both the wise and unwise are also equal. At this point it is important to mention this fact, that whatever has been written above about intellect, or knowledge through reason, the aim of this is not to demean or ridicule the intellect. What is meant from this is only that the intellect has its own domain, and comprehension of reality it is not within its remit. Furthermore, that which was viewed as being according to reason in the world of physics until yesterday, is being declared by the intellect itself of today as wrong. As we have seen in the previous pages, the fact is that the intellect is totally dependent on that knowledge which is determined through the senses, and since the perception of the senses keeps changing, hence the edifice raised on this foundation can also never be immutable. 8.9 The meaning of against intellect. From this we reach this question in addition: what do we mean by that which we generally term as being against intellect? First of all, let us study the intellect of an individual. In childhood his intellect is one thing, in youth it is something different, and in the age of maturity different from this, and in old age totally distinct from all of these. That thing which in his childhood an individual considers to be fully in accordance with intellect, 10 years later he himself laughs at these playthings. Those beliefs of life during his youth which he holds to be precisely in consonance with the demand of the intellect, he feels embarrassed about them as soon as he gains a bit more maturity. On reaching old age, the condition transforms completely. He considers the whole world to be devoid of intellect, and it is the world itself which laughs at him. If we grant long life to any, as per physical laws, we cause him to be reversed in nature. Will they not then understand? 36. 68. On the one hand, the environment and circumstances of the times will have changed, and on the other hand, the state of his memory is such that he even forgets what he already knows. It is Allah who creates you and takes your selves at death. And of you there are some who are sent back to a feeble age, so that they know nothing after having known much. For Allah is all-knowing, all-powerful. 16. 70. See also 22. 5. Just contemplate that, in these circumstances, when an individual remarks about something that this is contrary to reason, then what can be deduced from this? This is a question of against intellect. That thing which today he declares to be fully in accordance with intellect, as soon as tomorrow arrives, he will declare it to be against intellect. Furthermore, leaving aside the different phases of one individual's age, compare different individuals in one age group only. The difference in their intellects is so clearly evident that a matter which for one individual appears precisely in tune with reason, another individual will not even have the ability to comprehend it. And then, leaving aside individuals, take the intellect of the world. That thing which 50 years ago was considered to be contrary to intellect is today fully in accordance with intellect. If 20 or 30 years ago it had been said to someone that, if a man says something while sitting in some corner of London, that this will reach to all corners of the world simultaneously, he would have tried to dispatch him to a lunatic asylum. But today this same against intellect issue is being witnessed by every individual. Hence, that matter which today we describe as being contrary to reason, what is the evidence from it that it is, in truth, contrary to reason? The differences in the investigations of science about matter itself and the world of physics have passed before our eyes in the previous pages. Such differences which are not merely minor and superficial but are of principles and fundamentals. Say, how can a thing which is so changing and shifting be declared to be a trustworthy means of determining reality? Hence, to accept something blindly without using intellect and reasoning is against human eminence. So to merely deny something just because it is contrary to my intellect, or against the intellect of my era, is also utter foolishness and obstinacy. The Quran has mentioned these two groups in 2 verses of Surah Yunus in a very engaging and visionary way. Firstly, that category is mentioned which does not make use of intellect and reason and merely follows conjecture and fancy. But most of them follow nothing but fancy. Truly fancy can be of no avail against truth. Verily Allah is well aware of all that they do. 10. 36. The other category is that which rejects reality merely because it is against their intellect and cannot enter within the domain of knowledge. Nay, they charge with falsehood that whose knowledge they cannot compass, even before the elucidation thereof has reached them. Thus did those before them make charges of falsehood. But see what was the end of those who did wrong. 10. 39. Look closely, and whatever aspects of rejection and denial are seen, these will be manifestations of these two states of mind. The correct course is that those who rely on conjecture and guesswork should make use of their intellect and reasoning. And those who rely solely on their intellect should bear in mind the shortcomings of the intellect. From whatever has been written in the previous pages, this fact has become apparent that comprehension of complete reality cannot occur through science or through perceptive knowledge. In his book titled Limitations of Science, J. W. N. Sullivan writes, science has become self-conscious and comparatively humble. We are no longer taught that the scientific method of approach is the only valid method of acquiring knowledge about reality. Eminent men of science are insisting, with what seems a strange enthusiasm, on the fact that science gives us but a partial knowledge of reality. 8.10 Affairs of the World and Intellect. We have seen that, leaving aside others, even within the world of physics the grasp of reality is not something which is within the realm of the intellect. Now let us descend from the world of science and philosophy and enter the affairs of the world, and see whether intellect can be sufficient for human guidance in this domain also. We have already noted that only that system which is based on truth can satisfy the needs and demands of the human self. And since intellect cannot grasp reality, hence it is obvious that the system defined and shaped according to human intellect can never produce outcomes of growth and prosperity in the world of human affairs. In this respect, the inadequacy of intellect is not just that its scope is restricted, its weakness is, in fact, far more profound than this. Obviously, a human being is not made of stone. There is a storm of emotions in his heart which remains in a continually dynamic state. The mutual tussle between the emotions and intellect is so real and fundamental for which there is no need for any evidence. When emotions, e.g., anger, jealousy, revenge, or on the other side, the sentiment of love, overwhelm man, he carries out those acts about which he himself becomes remorseful once these emotions subside, and bears so much loss that at times he remains regretful for the remainder of his life. So much so, that by becoming overwhelmed by these emotions at times, man even toys with his life. A sick person knows that by eating something his disease will become worse, yet despite knowing this, he consumes it, and then bears its punishment. A person knows that the punishment for murder is the death penalty, but in a rage of revenge he becomes blind, and is hanged on the gallows. Up till now were those basic limits within which we can sense that such and such an act was carried out under the influence of emotions, and another as a consequence of the demand of the intellect. But Armageddon, in reality, begins beyond this, when the justifying intellect, by itself becoming influenced by the emotions, deceives man through the guise of a kindly advisor. In this regard, the subject of psychoanalysis has revealed to some extent those realities which were not evident hitherto. Though at every moment this technique is still in its infancy, in reality it has at the same time added a new chapter in the world of the psyche. In other words, what happens is that there is a demand of human desire. The intellect invents a rational argument for its justification, and presents such reasonings for the attainment of this goal that all of this appears to be fully in accord with the intellect, although it is totally based on the desires of the emotions. Can you see to what an abyss of ruin and destruction the guidance of the intellect alone will lead man? Philosophy from both the past and today agrees on this fact that our emotions are the motives for our efforts and deeds. In the words of Aristotle, the intellect cannot trigger any of our forces because every act which is carried out intentionally, no matter how rational it may appear, based on intellect, is in reality based on our vested interest, and for benefit it is essential that its basis should be on emotions, in order to incline willpower to take action. Awareness of self-interest is very necessary. Other than this, there is no other incentive which can work for this. Dr. Joad writes in his book, "Reason, it is widely suggested, is a mere tool, or handmaid of desire. Its function is to secure the ends which we unconsciously set ourselves, by inventing excuses for what we instinctively want to do and arguments for what we instinctively want to believe. Whatever degree of chaos and turmoil is inflicted on the world today, is merely because every individual and every group wish to satisfy their own emotions and achieve their own desires. The skill of the intellect provides the means for the accomplishment of these emotions and desires. Now a different battle of wits commences, and the effort of every individual is to garner leverage by deceiving others. Using the power of his intellect, a shopkeeper tries to hoodwink a customer and sell something at an inflated price, while the customer tries to make a fool of the shopkeeper on the back of his intellect and purchase it at a reduced price. This is on a smaller scale. On a larger scale, affairs between states and nations are settled on a similar line. The whole basis of the politics of the worshippers of intellect is on these deceitful tactics. The one whose intellect becomes dominant is the one who is successful and triumphant. In front of him all laws, constitutions, principles and values remain meaningless. This is what has been happening in the world up until now and what is taking place today as well. This is the very reason that the individual who considers the purpose of his life to be only the fulfillment of his emotions remains deprived from the path of growth and development, despite possessing knowledge and intellect. This is because instead of providing him with correct guidance, his knowledge and intellect furnish the means and resources for the fulfillment of his desires. This is the reason that the Quran, along with emphasizing the importance of knowledge and intellect, also unveiled this fact that when the intellect acts under the influence of the emotions, man can never find the path to eminence. The Quran states, "Then see you such a one as takes as his God his own vain desire. Allah has, knowing him as such, left him astray, and sealed his hearing and his heart, and understanding, and put a cover on his sight. Who then will guide him after Allah has withdrawn guidance? Will you not then receive admonition?" 45:23. Hearing, sight, and the mind, these were the roots to knowledge. But when intellect and knowledge become subservient to emotions and desires, then veils become drawn over the ears and eyes, and the heart becomes cloaked in covers. That is why the Quran has stated that for al-ilm, i.e., true knowledge, which will be covered later, subservience to anyone's emotions is not legitimate. Thus have we revealed it to be a judgment of authority in Arabic. Were you to follow their vain desires after the knowledge which has reached you, then would you find neither protector nor defender against Allah. 13:37. Human emotions desire to remain ensnared on the path of captivating scenes of color and fragrance. But the one who has the light of reality before his eyes thinks of the destination, regardless whether that destination is distant and even if the path is full of perils. In connection with the story of Karen, the Quran has stated, "So he went forth among his people in the pride of his worldly glitter. Said those whose aim is the life of this world, oh, that we had the like of what Karen has got. For he is truly a Lord of mighty good fortune." But those who had been granted true knowledge said, "Alas for you, the reward of Allah, in the hereafter, is best for those who have Iman and work righteousness. But this none shall attain, save those who steadfastly persevere in righteousness." 28:79-80. This is the reason why the knowledge of those who consider immediate benefits to be the reality of life, and who perceive success in the satisfaction of their emotions in this way, remains trapped within the four walls of the emotions and does not allow his sights to reach the true reality. But they have no knowledge therein. They follow nothing but conjecture, and conjecture avails nothing against truth. Therefore, shun those who turn away from our message and desire nothing but the life of this world. That is as far as knowledge will reach them. Verily your Rabb knows best those who stray from his path, and he knows best those who receive guidance. 53:28-30. Gradually his state becomes such that his intellect becomes completely obedient to his emotions, and despite treading on the wrong path, he considers that I am entirely on the true path. This is the final limit of human debasement. If anyone withdraws himself from remembrance of our Rahman, most gracious, of his laws and guidance, We appoint for him a Satan to be an intimate companion to him. Such evil ones really hinder them from the path, but they think that they are being guided aright. 43. 36-37. This is that point about which it is stated that despite possessing sight man becomes blind. Sees and comprehends everything, but heads towards the hell of destruction. With regard to accounts of former nations, the Quran states, "Remember also the Ad and the Thamud people clearly will appear to you from the traces of their buildings, their fate. Satan made the deeds alluring to them, and kept them back from the path, though they were gifted with intelligence and skill." 29:38. Its explanation is presented in another verse in the following words. "And we had firmly established them in a prosperity and power which we have not given to you, O Quraysh, and we had endowed them with faculties of hearing, seeing, heart and intellect. But of no profit to them were their faculties of hearing, sight, and heart and intellect when they went on rejecting the signs of Allah. And they were completely encircled by that which they used to mock at." 46:26. And if the tales of the Ad and Thamud are so ancient to you that their effect has become dissipated, then see what the state is of the visionaries of Europe in front of your own eyes. How they themselves, and with them the whole world, is encircled by annihilation, and despite possessing eyes, no path of escape is visible. How could it be visible anyhow? 1. The intellect itself is finite, and then over and above this, is influenced by the environment and circumstances, and trapped on all sides by emotions. This is because human vision remains purely at the surface and cannot delve into the depths of affairs. That is why it is stated, "But it is possible that you dislike a thing which is good for you, and that you love a thing which is bad for you. So do not decide on good and bad based on the likes and dislikes of your emotions. But Allah knows, in which dislike of yours there is good and in which liking there is bad. And you know not." 216. This is the short-sightedness of the intellect, on account of which man keeps desiring those things which are, in reality, harmful for him. The prayer that man should make for good, he makes for evil. For man is given to hasty deeds. 17:11. See also 21:37. Reflect once again on this weakness of man, that he is given to seeking immediate results. Here, something appears before him, and at the same time his emotions deceive his eyes by covering them with a veil of extreme beauty and attraction. He inquired from his intellect, and due to the status of being a slave to the emotions, the intellect promptly concocted an intellectual justification in its support. And so, what then took place? For the attainment of this aim, blood and water became one. As if the whole purpose of his life is concealed in the accomplishment of this very aim, and never even thought to look behind these deceptive veils to find out what is concealed there. It is indeed true that man seeks immediate benefits. 8.11 Social life and guidance of the intellect alone. If man had to live a life in which one individual lived on one island and a second lived far away alone on another, even then time would have passed. But in the words of Aristotle, man is a political animal. He happens to have a social nature and needs to live among others. The consequence of this pattern of life is that there is mutual confrontation between the self-interest of men. This confrontation is based on emotions. Self-interest is connected to the emotions. And the force which brings the demands of the emotions to fruition is the intellect. Hence, for naturally social man, guidance of intellect alone, which more correctly should be called the work of emotions, is very destructive. Please note that human rights and their preservation is that very foundation on which the skyscraper of human civilization is established. the state and its system, government and its administration, kingdom and its organization and management, engagement in tussle between tribes, wrestling of one nation with another nation, one country invading another country. What are all these? These are the tales written with fire and blood of the exploitation and suppression of human rights and interests and their protection. 2:36. In this respect, from Hulagu Khan and Genghis Khan to our modern era, the apparently civilized but, in reality, savage nations are all continuing on, all colored in just one hue. What has intellect taught them? Is it not only this, how the most effective means of murder and mayhem, ruin and destruction can be invented? The era of Hulagu Khan and Genghis Khan was one of savagery and ignorance. This is why, in those times, it was only with difficulty that one human being could kill another within a few hours. Today, knowledge and intellect are at the greatest heights, and the state of human savagery is such that, in one moment, millions of human beings can be propelled into a hell of fire and blood. 8.12 Human bloodbath. Habitations after habitations, and country after country are destroyed and made barren in this way, so that it appears as if nothing had ever existed there. In the battlefield soldiers play with the flames of fire, while yonder inside the cities, teams of scientists are wholly immersed in this pursuit, that by using all their renowned assets of knowledge and intellect some new invention should come into their hands through which the destruction of mankind could be made to happen as quickly as possible. 10 years after the end of World War I, 63 governments out of 68 in the world signed a treaty which is well known by the name of the Kellogg-Briand Pact, in which they declared with great enthusiasm that, deeply sensible of their solemn duty to promote the welfare of mankind, persuaded that the time has come when a frank renunciation of war as an instrument of national policy should be made, to the end that the peaceful and friendly relations now existing between their peoples may be perpetuated. Convinced that all changes in their relations with one another should be sought only by pacific means and be the result of a peaceful and orderly process, and that any signatory power which shall hereafter seek to promote its national interests by resort to war should be denied the benefits furnished by this treaty. Hopeful that, encouraged by their example, all the other nations of the world will join in this humane endeavor, and by adhering to the present treaty as soon as it comes into force bring their peoples within the scope of its beneficent provisions, thus uniting the civilized nations of the world in a common renunciation of war as an instrument of the national policy. pp. 2-3. But before the ink of this peace treaty had even dried, these same nations again became entangled in conflicts with each other in the same way, and all this for what purpose? For the sake of bread, and for the preservation of each of their own nations' race. Does any need remain for further proof after this of this glaring fact, that for the guidance of socially natured man the guidance of the intellect, which is in reality an instrument to achieve his desires, is not guidance but robbery? This is the reason that Europe, having become so fed up with the existing system, which was based on intellect alone, is now desperately seeking some new system like a madman. With regard to the decline of Western civilization, after searching everywhere, Professor Cobham, who has been previously quoted, is compelled to write, "It only remains to ask whether there is any foundation other than reason on which to build the rule of law. If there were a universal religion, such a basis might be found in its divinely inspired commands. In a world which has many religions, to attempt natural law founded on any one of them would not only be difficult to justify theoretically but would in practice mean bringing back the ages of religious war. For the time being ignore this aspect. What a big stumble the professor has taken at the later part of this excerpt. Here, simply see how Europe, having become fed up with its social system which was based on intellect, is now searching for such a system whose foundation is on a divine revelation. Can there be any greater evidence than this of the intellect alone being insufficient? 8.13 What kind of system does Europe desire? Because Professor Cobham was not able to discover any universal religion. This is because true Islam was not before them. We have never conveyed true Islam to them, otherwise Europe has been desperately looking for Islam. Hence, further on he discusses this issue as to what sort of system the world desires today. He writes, "Now, natural law exists to provide a norm for conduct. It must therefore be an ethical law. In asking whether there is an innate natural law, what we are asking is whether there are any ethical laws which are universally recognized by all mankind, and which can be deduced from human behavior, not as abstract principles of justice, but as actually observed positive conceptions of right. If such there are, they constitute our natural law." After this, having enlarged upon the issues of human rights and human nature, he reaches this conclusion. It is reasonable, then, to believe that the existence of universal ethical ideas can be established. The ethical law is not a law which can be proved by reason, for it depends upon the distinction between right and wrong, or good and evil, and on a conviction that men should seek the one and shun the other. And how can this ethical imperative of behavior be proved? If we ask why men should do right and avoid wrong, what answer can be given in any other terms than those in which the question is stated? We cannot go behind them. They are a datum. At the same time, ethics is not instinctive, for unethical behavior is common enough. Have you noticed what it is that these flag-bearers of knowledge and intellect, and civilization and science are in search of, having become fed up in the hands of their societal system? Of such a code of life that is fully in accordance with human nature. In fact is based on nature itself, which the whole of mankind can accept in the status of the values of nature, and in this way, this code can become a universal system of government. According to Professor Cobham, such a system is neither present instinctively within human beings, nor can it be established through intellect. Hence, there needs to be another manner according to which this kind of code could come into existence. Details of this will be covered later. 8.14 Inner disquiet of Europe. The comment of Professor Joad regarding the current disquiet of the heart and cognitive dissonance of Europe is also worthy of attention. He writes, "Machines have given enormous power to man these days. This power can be used for constructive or destructive purposes. He can split open mountains, dig up oceans, scour the sky with this power, and so on. But even after acquiring this enormous power he is not happy. Rather, he is more depressed. The power of machines is not helping to give him the peace which he wants. Rather, they serve to destroy him. If this power is not kept under control somehow, mankind's fate seems threatened. Why has man's struggle of thousands of years ended up like this? Why has he become so helpless at the hands of machines? The reason is that, although we have acquired power and strength, we have not been able to find the right intellect to use it. Therefore, we need to guide this power to the right path, and when we are able to strike a balance between power and intellect, our travails can be over, and mankind can escape the inevitable destruction. It is without doubt that man has exceeded his forefathers in mastering the forces of nature. But as far as politics and morality are concerned, it is still at the level that was existent during the ancient people of Greece. We seem to have advanced greatly in materialism, but spiritually and morally we have not progressed a bit. And the crying need today is to find the moral strength to guide us in utilizing the great power that we have developed properly. Otherwise this power shall be our bane. Have you noticed how these thinkers of the West are being slowly drawn towards that point to which the Quran has provided guidance? After this Professor Joad writes, The question now arises as to how to acquire moral knowledge and the means of changing the presently dead spiritual and moral life. Apparently no solution is in sight, and it seems that the great power of the machines seems impossible to control and create new moral values. The youth of the modern world are visibly affected by this new morality. Leisure, they hold, should be utilized for enjoyment. It is notorious today that heavenly rewards no longer attract and infernal punishments no longer deter with the pristine force. Many people are frankly derisive of both, and, seeing no prospect of divine compensation in the next world for the wine and kisses. While the ultimate purpose of life may be doubtful, this, at least, they hold to be clear, that we should enjoy the present and express and develop our natures. Hence enjoyment and self-expression come to be regarded as ends in themselves. Probably this is the period which, in Spengler's words, is the death of culture. Should we then believe that the present civilization is on the brink of destruction and Europe is progressing toward the destruction that the Roman civilization met with? The Western philosopher Pascal says the human mind is compelled to have faith in something, and that is why he is forced to love something or somebody. And when faith and love fail to provide him with something useful, he is weaned away by destructive purposes. There can be no vacuum in the universe, and this is as true of the moral world as it is for the physical world. When human beings stop having faith in God, they start having faith in the devil. And if man gives up good purposes of life, he is attracted toward evil purposes. If Europe wants to get out of this quagmire, there is only one way to do it, that is by replacing uncertainty by certainty. To stop being wayward and to develop faith in new values. A life without dynamism of faith and a moral code is worse than death. According to H.G. Wells, the scourge of this era is that there is enormous power but no good use that it can be put to. I.e., there is no purpose for the attainment of which the aspirations of the youth can be mobilized. But there is no need for despair, for the search for this purpose has not ended within us, and that gives us hope that perhaps we may find that new era, and if we fail to do so, our civilization shall be destroyed. If we are to escape this disaster, we will have to find a religion which we sincerely believe in and fashion our lives according to its principles. All of this disquiet and cognitive dissonance of Europe, all of this uneasiness and anxiety, this fear and cowering, this absence of tranquility, and the inferno of scarcity of peace is a consequence of that civilization which is raised on the foundations of intellect alone and is established according to a mechanistic concept of the universe. Intellect alone cannot grasp reality because the system established by it can never be congruent with the demands of the human self. And because the mechanical concept turns man into a machine, and instead of acknowledging his life as a dynamic flowing stream, ends it in this very arena of water and mud. This is why the poisonous serpents of hopelessness remain intensely busy in igniting fire and emitting poison in the depths of his subconscious. In this way, according to Allama Iqbal, the youth of Europe, thus, wholly overshadowed by the results of his intellectual activity, the modern man has ceased to live soulfully, i.e., from within. In the domain of thought he is living in open conflict with himself. And in the domain of economic and political life he is living in open conflict with others. He finds himself unable to control his ruthless egoism and his infinite gold hunger, which is gradually killing all higher striving in him and bringing him nothing but life weariness. Absorbed in the fact, that is to say, the optically present source of sensation, he is entirely cut off from the unplumbed depths of his own being. In the wake of his systematic materialism has at last come that paralysis of energy which Huxley apprehended and deplored. We have already seen that comprehension of reality is not possible using the power of reason. Intellect Now we will need to see whether, aside from this knowledge, man also has some other knowledge. But before reaching this link, it is essential to note whether, within the physical form of man, the brain is the only means of knowledge and perception, or is there something other than this? In other words, is man merely the name of this form of water and clay which is called the outcome of the mechanical process of evolution, or something else beyond it? The world surrounding man can be divided into three parts. 1. Inorganic matter. 2. Life. 3. Consciousness. Physics is about matter. After this, there is biology, then consciousness. According to the mechanical concept of the universe, the biggest proponents of which are Darwin and his advocates, as has been noted earlier, and the distinct achievement is the theory of evolution of matter. By the amalgamation of various elements of matter, somehow or other, the branch of life sprouted forth, and traversing various evolutionary stages continued to progress forward, and together with this continually became more and more refined, until such a time that the animal mold acquired the human form, which is declared as being the final link in the process of evolution. 8.15 How does human consciousness take birth? As a consequence of this doctrine, in the world of science, there now appears to be no scientific basis for the idea that the present rich complexity of human endowment will ever be materially exceeded. It was the opinion of these people that the location of human consciousness is the brain, which is the outcome of the mechanical process of evolution. Therefore, when this mechanical process of the human body ends, then nothing will remain behind either. But where research in modern times has delivered amazing discoveries about the reality and basis of matter, it has also, to a great extent, transformed archaic points of view in the sphere of life. The research of scientists of the modern era is that the human power of intellect is not a product of the mechanical action of matter. The renowned biologist J.S. Haldane, after investigation of this issue, has reached this conclusion, that human consciousness is not a mechanical function. This is because it can never even be conceived about a machine that it can become the means for its own life and sustenance and for further development and growth. Professor A.V. Hill himself explains about life in one of his lectures, stating, "I am not intending to tell you today, you have heard it often, and it is not true that the phenomena of life could be explained, at least by someone clever enough, in terms of physics and chemistry of the present time. Whether the future physics and the future chemistry will suffice I will not guess. When the events of physics have become indeterminate, when chemistry has become physics, then indeed, the situation may be different. Until that day I shall continue with J.S. Haldane to insist that in the organism regarded as a whole we have phenomena of a different kind, one whose unity and fundamental nature are essential as any of the concepts of physics." 8.16 Life is not a mechanical process. In other words, life is not an appellation for the manifestation of an arrangement of elements. It is not the mechanical sum total of its constituent elements. Its fundamental nature is completely different from the nature and composition of those elements from which it is a compound. Hence, when life itself is not a result of the mechanistic act of material evolution, then it is apparent that the finer potential of life, i.e., human intellect, how can it be the outcome of a mechanical process? Professor C. Lloyd Morgan, after discussing this problem in detail in his famous book, The Emergence of Novelty, has reached this conclusion that human intellect is not the product of previous links in the evolutionary process. Similarly, Dr. Driesch, a famous researcher of biology, writes, "One great difficulty in the path of the mechanistic doctrine was consciousness. This is because consciousness is not intrinsically a material entity." After this he writes how, After 1900, fundamental changes began to gradually appear in the concept of scholars of biology and psychology, as a result of which this mechanistic concept became a tale of the past. According to these scholars, consciousness is not a product of material evolution. From The Great Design by C. L. Morgan. The following excerpt by Wilden Carr, quoted by Iqbal, has special significance in this respect. If intellect is a product of evolution, the whole mechanistic concept of the nature and origin of life is absurd, and the principle which science has adopted must clearly be revised. We have only to state it to see the self-contradiction. How can the intellect, a mode of appreciating reality, be itself an evolution of something which only exists as an abstraction of that mode of apprehending which is the intellect? If intellect is an evolution of life, then the concept of life which can evolve intellect as a particular mode of apprehending reality must be the concept of a more concrete activity than that of any abstract mechanical movement which the intellect can present to itself by analyzing its apprehending content. And yet further, if the intellect be a perfect of the evolution of life, it is not absolute but relative to the activity of that which had evolved it. How then, in such cases, can science exclude the subjective aspect of the knowing and build on the objective presentation as an absolute? Clearly the biological sciences necessitate reconsideration of the scientific principle. From these explanations this fact appears before us that the human intellect is not the outcome of a combination of material elements. It is something quite distinct from this, and to determine its nature and reality is out with the reach of biology. Hence, discussing this topic, Samuel writes, "It is equally a fallacy to say that, since biology has been successful up to a certain point through employing the methods of chemistry and physics, the same methods are applicable beyond that point. It may well be that success has stopped at that point for the very reason that beyond it there is a different subject matter not amenable to those methods. Until now we have observed that the human intellect is not a product of the mechanical process of evolution. From this we have definitely reached this conclusion that some non-matter entity in the human physical form cannot be rejected simply on the basis that its existence cannot be proven through a mechanical process in accordance with the knowledge of physics or biology. One such thing among these kinds of things within the human form is the power of intellect, which we have termed as the center of knowledge of reasoning, and which in common terminology is called the brain. But in the world of man, other than this, there is also another thing whose domain is beyond the limits of the power of reasoning. The Quran uses the term nafs for this hidden world, philosophy calls it the self or ego. It is from this that human personality is defined, and it is from this that his individuality is established. When you say I, then by this is meant neither your body of flesh and bones, nor your brain, but something separate from these. 8.17 The human self. Nafs. The entire dynamic enterprise of the universe is continuing because of this very I, which is called the human nafs, whose status is higher than the world of reasoning. So far, the world of science has not yet been able to provide any meaningful and useful information about the human nafs. In this respect, according to Samuel, on the physical side science has gone much less far. Our knowledge of life and mind seems to be now at about the same stage as was man's knowledge of matter 3 or 4 centuries ago. What is the mutual relationship between heart and mind, vision and intellect? How do these influence each other? Where do the boundaries of their spheres of action and execution become separate from each other? These are those questions whose answer has not yet been found. In this connection, Sir Charles Sherrington writes, "Strictly we have to regard the relation of mind to brain as still not merely unsolved, but still devoid of a basis of its very beginning." Sullivan writes regarding this, "Science is at its strongest in dealing with the material universe. Its pronouncements on other matters are relatively weak and hesitating. Psychology or its other subjects discuss the traits of the self and the manifestations of consciousness, but regarding the nature of nafs, these fields are also unable to tell us anything. Leaving aside nature, in the words of Lord Balfour, nobody can feel or even imagine how physical changes produce changes in the psyche or self. Hear in his own words what Lord Balfour writes at another place about the nature of the human self. An I must have character quite apart from the experiences, active and passive, which fills his conscious life. He must have, or be, a soul which is something more than an organized collection on capacities or a procession of physical status, a soul which is not only merely substance but has an individuality which is unique and indescribable. But despite knowing nothing, the Western world has been forced to accept this fact that nafs, or I, is not merely the sum of a few traits and attitudes but is a new center of conscious life and a new source of conscious activities. Professor Eddington, who has already been mentioned, talks about this topic in a very profound way. He writes, "We have previously discussed up until this point as to how electrical particles have come together somehow or other and adopted the shape of the human form. But we will need to acknowledge this fact that a human being is a completely different and distinct thing from those elements which have already been discussed. I do not say that consciousness has not undergone evolutionary stages, but this is an aspect of reality which cannot come within the comprehension of our material research and investigation. From here, the question of the duality of matter and soul arises. On the one hand is consciousness, which becomes the abode of different ideas and states. On the other side is the material brain, in which neural activity and electric charges dance around like a cyclone. The mechanistic concept of life will say this, that when electric impulses dance in our brain, thoughts are generated from this. On the other hand, we see that within human consciousness there is a novel world of emotions and desires, wishes and urges, and rights and duties, on the tiny impulse of which all the constituents of the brain begin to spin. This is that world whose details and states cannot be mapped by the scales of physics." Further on, Professor Eddington writes, "As stated earlier, we do not possess any knowledge about the reality of things in the physical world. We only know those symbols which influence themselves upon our minds through our senses. But in this whole universe there is one such thing in addition of which we have direct knowledge, and that is the human mind. We cannot reach reality through symbols, but if we place these symbols on the background of the world of reality with which our mind is connected, then we can reach the reality of things. But the reality of the human mind itself cannot be determined through the laws of physics, because these laws can only take us to the symbols, and cannot proceed beyond these. When life becomes immersed in consciousness, then we reach an altogether distinct world. This is that world in which the principles of chemistry and physics remain useless, in the same way as the attempt to govern the population of human beings with laws made like the rules and regulations of grammar. Have you noted what conclusion that materialistic thinkers of the West are reaching regarding the human self? And C. Professor C. Lloyd Morgan has written a research paper on the topic of evolution of the self, at the end of which he notes, "Nonetheless, I confess my belief that this ascent may be regarded as a manifestation or revelation of a supreme mind, conceived as the creator of all that we are led to interpret as new. What I find in evolution is one great scheme from bottom to top, from first to last. What I also believe is that this advance throughout nature is a revelation of divine agency. And since mind at its best is the highest term in the course of evolutionary ascent, it may well be said that the evolution of mind reveals the agency of mind. But it is, as I believe, mind or spirit infinite and timeless. Therein the words, first, and last, novelty, and recurrence, are divested of the meaning which attaches to them in discussing the ascent of mind through new products to further novelty. Spiritus Creator as eternal and omnipresent is not the outcome of evolution, but that of which. Evolution is the progressive revelation. At another place he writes, "It is not for me to bid others accept this faith. But since there are others who do subscribe to it, I ask them in conclusion, does not an evolutionary scheme which displays in its tapestry a fabric so beautifully interwoven, which includes also a picture portraying the ascent of mind, lend weighty support to their belief in mind or spirit as creative and directive of all novelty and all recurrence?" In the above quoted excerpt, keep before you the words creative and directive power of God, and then look at these brilliant verses of the Quran in which these attributes of Allah are mentioned and reflect. Is the materialist of Europe not reaching these same conclusions through scientific research towards which the Quran had gestured 1400 years previously? In Surah Taha it is stated that in reply to the question of Pharaoh, "O Moses, who is the Rab of you two brothers?" Moses replied, he said, "Our Rab is he who gave to each created thing its form and nature, and further gave it guidance." 20:50. Similarly, Abraham stated, "Who created me, and it is he who guides me." 26:78. In Surah Al-A'la it is stated, "Who has created, and further given order and proportion, who has ordained laws, and granted guidance towards them." 87:2-3. Reflect on the words kalaka, created, and harder, guided, in these verses, and then see if the words creative and directive power as used by Professor Morgan are they not just a translation of these same Quranic words. Just contemplate to what great heights does the Quran take human knowledge. If somehow the Quran had been in front of these thinkers of the West, then how much easier their paths would have been. Their state is such that they keep treading on the wrong paths for ages, and then after suffering thousands of knocks, they come on to the right path. If in the search for reality in this boundless ocean, the towers of Quranic light are before them, then their every step will be towards the destination, and they would not have to stumble in the darkness. But this is not the place for this discussion. Whatever has been written in connection with the human self in the previous pages can also be understood. In other words, as life being a display of divine energy which is universal and flowing incessantly like electrical energy in the veins and arteries of the whole of the universe. When life is identified with consciousness, then from this the human ego becomes personified. Consciousness is an individual entity of man. No one else can share in my feeling of sorrow and pain. Others can sympathize with me, they can think of therapies for my pain, but they cannot share in the perception of my pain. Since the human ego is personified through the association and identification of life and consciousness, therefore it is also individual. It is through this individuality that it possesses its own permanent existence. Human consciousness is not a consequence of the mechanical process of evolution, hence the human self is also not a creation of physical evolution. The human form is the vehicle for the manifestation of this ego. The human being is, in reality, this very ego. The individuality of the ego is never wasted, therefore, there can be no effect on it by changing the vehicle. Such expanses can be created in the vessel of human consciousness that, in whatever pattern life desires the manifestation of its own self in a complete form, it should become capable of this. This is what is called the strengthened ego. When life and consciousness are identified through their infinity, then it is called, in the words of Iqbal, the ultimate ego. After discussing this ultimate ego, he writes, every atom of divine energy, however low in the scale of existence, is an ego. But there are degrees in the expression of egohood. Throughout the entire gamut of being runs the gradually rising note of egohood until it reaches its perfection in man. That is why the Quran declares the ultimate ego to be nearer to man than his own neck vein. On the basis of its own existence, individuality, and choice and intent, the human ego is the possessor of amazing and remarkable attributes and characteristics. As strength and expanse keep on developing in it, its attributes continue to align with the attributes and traits of the ultimate ego. But if decline and degradation keep on developing in it, then it will fall below the level of humanity and become destroyed. Those deeds through which strength is created in the ego are called amal-e-sala. Righteous deeds, those through which weakness appears in it, are called sayyat. Evil deeds. According to Iqbal, there are no pleasure-giving and pain-giving acts. There are only ego-sustaining and ego-dissolving acts. It is the deed that prepares the ego for dissolution or disciplines him for a future career. The principle of the ego-sustaining deed is respect for the ego in myself as well as in others. Personal immortality, then, is not ours as of right. It is to be achieved by personal effort. Man is only a candidate for it. Keep these explanations in mind and cast another eye on whatever has been quoted from the opinions of Western scholars about the human self in the previous pages, and the issue will become clear. This is not the place to go into further details regarding the human ego. The details given are considered to be sufficient for the reason for which this matter has been touched upon. From the previous pages this fact has become evident to us that, other than intellect, i.e., knowledge of reasoning, man possesses something else over which the laws of the intellect cannot govern. Now we have to see whether in this sphere of human life, which is outwith the domain of operation of the human intellect, there is any possibility of comprehending reality. The highest point within this sphere is called the human ego. But our observation is that not only in the case of man but even in animals some acts are of that kind which are not within the control of the intellect. Therefore, we cannot say that these kinds of acts which are carried out by man which are not under the obedience of his intellect, that they must of a surety be manifestations of his ego. Hence, we need to first of all see from what kinds of areas these kinds of acts, which are outwith the domain of the intellect, are carried out. 8.18 Instinct. In this respect, the first thing which comes before us is that which is called instinct. You will see that it is that sphere in which reasoning has no role, instead its beginning occurs at that time when intellect and consciousness have not yet even awakened. Other than man, in the rest of the universe, instinct is that entity which is commonly known as the laws of nature, according to which this whole system is continuing to function with organization and discipline. Whilst water is still in liquid form, it will flow downhill, it will conform to whatever shape you wish. On reaching a specific high temperature, it becomes steam and begins to evaporate. On the other hand, it becomes frozen due to the cold at a specific temperature. This is its instinct. This is its very nature. Fire always provides heat. Throw a stone upwards, it will always come downwards. After this, let us inspect the world of life itself. A duckling will run towards water as soon as it is hatched from an egg, but a chick sees its demise in water. A lion will die of hunger but will never lift his eyes to look at grass. A lamb may be starving to death but will never come anywhere near to meat. This is their instinct, going against which is not within their ability. Each one of them is following this law. The Quran states, "And to Allah does obeisance all that is in the heavens and on earth, whether moving, living creatures or the Malaika, for none are arrogant before their Rabb." 16:49. See also 13:15. All are under the obedience of his law. As far as the physical life of man is concerned, his child also adopts these things through instinct. As soon as a human child is born, it also seeks the sources of its food. This is not because it has made this choice through intellect that it should do this, but because this kind of urge is produced automatically within him, without reasoning. 8.19 Laws of Physical Life. Now the question is whether instinct can provide a solution to the issue which is before us. As far as the physical life of man is concerned, as in the case of animals, this is also under the obedience of physical laws. In hunger, thirst, tiredness, sleep, the process of procreation, etc. Both are governed by only one type of laws. But together with this, man has also been endowed with choice and intent. Although he does not bring his choice and intent into much use in his physical life because punishment is received immediately on going against physical laws. At the same time, it is also observed that the manifestations of the use of his intention and choices keep appearing all the time. As has been written above, a human child also turns towards the sources of his nourishment as soon as he is born, just like the offspring of a goat. But the condition of the human child is also such that whatever comes in front of him, whether it is beneficial or harmful, whether it is life-giving or poisonous, he puts it into his mouth without hesitation. This is why when a child starts crawling around, looking after him becomes challenging. Sometimes he puts his hand into fire. At other times he will be drowning in water. Sometimes he may swallow something. The state of the offspring of animals is never like this. And this is not only confined to childhood. For man, this takes place at every step during the whole journey of life till old age. The whole of life against nature, and its consequent thousands of types of maladies. Even though our own state was nevertheless like this. Whatever animals we acquired and domesticated for our own wishes and purposes. Gradually we also changed their pattern of life in such a way that we made them victims of diseases and problems similar to ours. When this is the situation in man's own physical life, then what the situation will be in his family, social, public, economic, and political life does not require further elaboration. This is the difference between the life of other things in the universe and human life, which is narrated in the following visionary and lofty words of the Quran. See you not that to Allah bow down in obedience all things that are in the heavens and on earth, the sun, the moon, the stars, the hills, the trees, the animals, and a great number among mankind. But a great number are also such as are fit for punishment, and such as Allah shall disgrace, none can raise to honor. These laws do not change. For Allah carries out all that He wills, as per His laws. 22:18. 8.20 The voice of conscience. But regarding the question before us, animal life has hardly any significance in this. The beginning of this question arises only from the level of being human. So what we need to look at is whether in the valley of humanity can the guidance of instinct be sufficient. In social life human affairs fall within the domain of ethics, and in the domain of ethics instinct is called the voice of conscience. Therefore, the matter reached this stage, whether the voice of conscience alone is capable of providing correct guidance to man. Can it be declared to be a trustworthy criterion for the differentiation and determination of good and evil? Is comprehension of reality within its competency? This is an established fact that ethical obligations commence with man. It is in the instinct of a sheep that it should eat grass and to not even raise its eyes to look at meat. But it is not within its instinct that it should graze only in the fields of its owner, and not intrude into someone else's field. This stipulation starts from man. It is generally stated that there is within man the power to differentiate, which tells him what is legitimate and what is not legitimate. The name given to this power to differentiate is conscience. This is called the inner voice of man or the fatwa of the heart. But the question is this: is there really any such power to differentiate inside man which can inform him of the difference between what is legitimate and what is illegitimate? This matter will be understood following close scrutiny that there is no such power within man which can differentiate between haq and batil, good and evil, legitimate and illegitimate. There is no doubt in this that a voice definitely rises from within man which forbids him from certain acts. But the question is whether this voice also differentiates between haq and batil. Observation provides an answer to this in the negative. It is apparent that haq and batil is a name for absolute values, not a name for relative values i.e., haq does not mean that for one individual it is haq and for another man it is not haq. If there is such a power within man which can differentiate between haq and batil, then it is obvious that it should arise equally from within every man. But it does not happen like this. We witness that when meat is placed before a child from a meat-eating family, then his conscience does not reproach him at all. Whereas when meat is mentioned to a child from a vegetarian family, he feels like retching. The children of professional criminal tribes will take the life of a human being without any hesitation and will feel pleasure in it. But a child from the Jain religion will not hurt even an insect or a fly. There is no doubt in this that the guilt-ridden self forbids evil. And I do call to witness the self-reproaching nafs. Self. 75. 2. But only from that evil which it considers to be evil. Though in this self there is a sense of guilt, it only causes him to feel guilty about that thing which it has, according to various influences, considered to be worthy of guilt. Hence, that thing which is termed as the voice of conscience cannot be a criterion for differentiation between haq and batil, because this voice becomes affected by external influences. Discussing this topic, Samuel writes, if it were true that there is a natural instinct implanted in every human being, which is an independent and infallible guide to right and wrong, then mankind would always have been and would be now of one mind on every question of right conduct. So it is clear that the fact that if a man holds, however sincerely and tenaciously, that this is the right thing for me to do, does not of itself make it so. Hence, the thing which is called conscience is shaped from those influences which man derives unconsciously from his forefathers, environment, training, and education. Other than this, it does not have any existence of its own. In the words of Iqbal, conscience is the name for internalized society. Therefore, how can conscience contain this ability to differentiate between haq and batil, good and evil, right and wrong? 8.21 Inclination. Zawq. After instinct, another domain of knowledge, without reasoning, comes before us. You will often have seen that an individual has two children. From the viewpoint of lineage and environment, both should be almost identical, but one of them has a natural inclination, of his own accord, towards poetry, and the other has no interest in it whatsoever. You will see an individual who, if some charming painting appears before him, will be stopped in his tracks and will stand there for hours totally oblivious of the world around him. But the rest of the world will pass by him as if there is nothing there which is any reason for attraction. And other such examples. This world of inclination is totally distinct from the world of reasoning. So far, research in biology has not been able to say how this difference in inclination becomes created. As a result of the lyrics of some good singer, a world of rapture and euphoria is felt in the depths of your being, but you can never make someone else understand how and why this happens. At the most you can explain some rules and terminology of the art of music, but that effect which was experienced by you can never be experienced by another. This world of rapturous and euphoric effects which are related to inclination cannot be measured using the scales of intellect. What is the cause for the difference in inclinations in different people? The sciences relating to human physical life have not been able to provide any information so far regarding this. In modern times, psychologists have made these matters part of their research and study, but even they have not been able to reach any definite conclusion in this respect. They say that a human child, while still in its infancy and not yet having learned to talk even, keeps absorbing signs of its environment into its subconscious, and in this way, according to his habits and traits, character and attitude, he becomes that which he is to become later on. Or we can say that the foundations of his future life become laid down in the initial 2 to 3 years of his childhood. Their assessment is that the manifestation of these unconscious impressions is what is known as this difference in inclinations. But no matter what the state and nature of human or individual inclination is, it is clear that, as with instinct and conscience, this entity also cannot become the means to comprehending reality. 8.22 Intuition. Wajdan. Apart from inclination, there is also another entity whose apparent connection is not with the world of reasoning. This is labeled as intuition. For example, some issue comes before you. Without working through the steps of reasoning, without thinking, you reach some conclusion, and that often turns out to be right. In the world of poetry, that which is called inspiration, its connection is also with intuition. The Arabs call it hatif. Up till now, the world of philosophy also has not been able to inform us about what the nature of intuition is. But a very famous proponent of intuition of our times, Bergson, calls it a higher kind of intellect, which is the unconscious outcome of concentration of thought. As an illustration, you can understand it as this, that when man talks, many kinds of traits awaken within him and become operational. He firstly thinks, what should I say, then he selects words for this, then by producing coordination between these words he links them together into sentences. After this, he utters these sentences from his lips. You can see how much effort a human being has to make to utter one sentence. When a child learns to talk for the first time, this effort of his becomes evident before us in a marked way. But if you look at an impassioned orator, he talks at the rate of 200 to 300 words per minute and keeps on speaking for hours. He thinks about his subject, also selects words for its expression, also puts these words into coordinated sentences. Then he delivers these sentences from his lips in such a way that not only should their pronunciation not be distorted, but so that those sentiments which they are the means for expression become fully manifested through the variation of the pitch and volume, and pleasure and sorrow of his voice. He continues to do all of this with an electrifying speed, and leaving aside the audiences. He himself does not have any knowledge or awareness of when he is thinking, how he is selecting the words, when he is converting these words into the form of sentences, and then how he keeps on delivering these like the steady flow of a river. In this performance of his no intellectual effort is visible, but all this takes place entirely through intellectual activity. By concentration of intellectual effort, this kind of trait becomes developed in man so that when he concentrates his attention on some subject, then unconsciously different parts of the machinery of his mind spring into action simultaneously and act with such speed that the normal slow movement of the intellect cannot perceive this action. Just like the movement of a wheel spinning at 5,000 revolutions a minute cannot be detected by even the sharpest eyesight. It appears static. The research of psychology of modern times is that our information starts to come to the conscious level from the record room of the unconscious self. The faster that the machinery of consciousness is, this store of information will come to the surface of consciousness with proportional speed. And, as noted earlier, if the speed of movement of this machinery is electrifying, then the consciousness has no notion even of how all of this is taking place. So much so, that at times he does not even remember when he obtained this information. Forgotten tales, past events and incidents, lost memories of adorned metaphors and similes, lost poetry and excerpts dispersed into the depths of the atmosphere keep appearing as if these are descending from somewhere. Though there is no descent of these from outside, these emerge from the depths of the subconscious. This is what is called, according to the research of modern psychology, intuition. But whatever the nature of intuition may be, it is obvious that this attribute also cannot become the means for comprehending reality. 8.23 Genius. Nabga. The individual in whom this state of intuition appears to be of a greater intensity is termed as a genius. How these traits reach to this level of intensity in a genius is a puzzle which is still in need of being solved in the world of science. Biologists take the brains of such individuals and then sit and observe and study the composition and structure of the cells of their brains. But when these people have not yet been able to even determine where man's intellect itself comes from or how it is created, then what can they state definitively about the nature and form of the special ability of a genius? Whatever they have been able to say so far about it is only this, that this is an emergent evolution, which lies outwith the limits of the mechanistic process of evolution. In the words of Hogben, 30 years of controlled experiment on the lines suggested by Mendel's work has given abundant proof that from time to time there do arise in pure stocks individuals which have entirely new, hereditable properties. Such individuals are called mutants or sports. Professor A. E. Taylor explains this reality in these words. When we have made as complete an enumeration as possible of the factors out of which a thing has been developed, it still remains true that the thing itself, once developed, may exhibit a character which was not present in all or any of these factors, and could not have been foretold on the strength of the fullest knowledge of the characters of the factors. C. Lloyd Morgan writes in this context, if it is asked, what is that thing actually which you call emergent? Its brief reply is simply this, that it is some new kind of relation. And if it is asked, in what respect are these relations new, then the reply is only this, that nothing can be said about their characteristics before they appear. The doctrine of emergent evolution, and tangible evidence and observations in its support has shaken the mechanical concept about the universe to its foundations. Having arrived at this point of astonishment, there is no other option but to acknowledge this fact, that into the chain of normal causation, there are inserted exceptional factors of divine action. In view of this helplessness of the biologists, experts in psychology have now made this subject the target of their extensive efforts and focus of research. They declare that this characteristic is, in reality, simply an extended form of intuition. When we reach an indubitable point about intuition, then the problem of the characteristics of genius will also be automatically resolved. But what conclusion the research of these sciences has reached, the purpose for which we touched upon this topic, is clear, i.e., that the comprehension of reality is not within the grasp of a genius either. In fact, a hapless genius is in a greatly disadvantageous position in this respect as compared to ordinary scholars. Though he may be a genius in his particular field, he is absolutely naive in other aspects of life, even though the one who has knowledge of reality should be a genius in every sphere of life. This is because reality is an indivisible entity which cannot be separated into different parts. The condition of the one who has knowledge of reality cannot be such that on one branch of life he is blossoming, and the rest of his branches are facing autumn. The actual fact is that the development of a genius is disproportional, and this is the reason why there is no balance and stability in the life of such people. Leaving genius on one side, Different sciences also examine one aspect at a time of reality, and when they study human beings according to this principle, viewing him as a machine, they research each separate part of him. The state of a machine is such that by joining together its different parts the machine becomes complete, but the state of human life is not like this. It is absolutely impossible that you can study the character and behavior, emotions and feelings, inclinations and preferences each separately, and then give the name of an individual to the sum total of this. That individual will not be a combination of this sum total. The human self is the name of a distinct individual reality, and a distinct individual reality can neither divide into parts, nor by putting the parts together can it come into existence. Only that knowledge can be called knowledge which views man as a whole and understands him as such. A genius whose traits are developed on one pattern only is simply not capable of this, that he can study man as a whole, or be able to obtain full knowledge about reality. As stated above, genius is in reality the term for an intensity of intuition, and when intuition itself cannot comprehend reality, then how will this be possible for genius? There is no doubt in this that benefit can be obtained from the electrifyingly fast potentials of a genius, but he cannot become a leader of the caravan of mankind. Moving on from this, and another arena of non-reasoning knowledge comes before us. This is that domain in which the manifestations of the power of thought or intention, or power of the ego, are witnessed. Amongst us this is called the world of mysticism. 8.24 Mysticism. Tasawwuf. But since by tasawwuf the mind is directed towards a specific systemized institution, it is better therefore that we do not call it by this literal name. In English it is called mysticism, Batniyat, but due to the paucity of another suitable term for them, mysticism also comprises messengerhood, Nubuwwat, within its orbit. There is a concern therefore that this word mysticism can be misconstrued. And this concern is not just an assumption. It has often been observed that those people who have studied these matters solely through the English language do not differentiate between the traits and character, and environment and status of tasawwuf and nubuwwat, messengerhood, and as a consequence become trapped in a strange merry-go-round. Tasawwuf is in fact a world of meditation and contemplation, whose connection is with the display and demonstration of the power of the ego. For the sake of facilitating explanation and necessity, we will refer to it by the word Batniyat. Cast an eye on any period of human history and the manifestations of this practice will be visible in every land and in every era. If we look at it from the scholarly point of view, then from the initial stages of willpower, from auto-suggestion to its final stages, all are different links of one process only. Regarding instinct and intuition, we have seen that they are the consequence of inheritance or environment. Skill and effort has no role in them. But Batniyat is an acquired skill. A disciple from his guru, a follower from his saint, or a pupil from his teacher acquires this technique formally, and through various disciplines and procedures, meditations and hardships, keeps on adding to this prowess. These meditations and hardships increase human willpower or concentration of mind, as a result of which those kinds of paranormal manifestations are displayed in his act which are understood among us as tricks or displays of spirituality, but which in the West is called hypnotism and is learnt as a science, and is used greatly in hospitals. Its connection is in actual fact with psychology. European psychology still remains in its era of infancy, although in the modern era there have been famous scholars of it who have come and gone and are still present. In the meantime, discussions certainly take place among them about the conditions of the human psyche, its influences and behaviors, kinds and stages, levels and manifestations. But about the human self itself, they also know nothing of what it actually is. As for the scholars of today, Whether in the east or west, they are themselves lost in the valleys of perplexity. Therefore, leaving aside consideration of the nature and reality of the human self, we should check if this knowledge can provide a solution to this question, which is the focus of this discussion. As has been written earlier, reality is an integral whole and is indivisible. Thus, in front of whichever gaze reality becomes unveiled, regardless of the differences in time and distance, the upshot of its outcome should be the same at every point. But turn over the pages of history and see, or by casting an eye on your own era, you will see that the empirical results of the claimants of Kashf will be different. Discussing this subject in his renowned book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, William James writes, "Among the visions and messages some have always been too patently silly. Among the trances and convulsive seizures some have been too fruitless for conduct and character to pass themselves off as significant, still less as divine. Besides, introspection is a different thing, and its results are so varied that it cannot be called a universal thing." 8.25 Kashf is not proof of being right. This is why even among mystics themselves the Kashf of someone cannot be declared to be an authority and proof for anyone else, even for the one who is experiencing the Kashf. This is because for the evaluation of this reality he himself does not have any criterion for which inclinations and influences, leanings and doubts, this Kashf is an outcome. Rahmani Ilham, and together with it Shaitani Ilham, is an open reality. Psychology, and in particular psychoanalysis, has performed a useful service in this respect. By analyzing the inclinations and influences of the human psyche, it informs us what can be the basis for such and such a dream or contemplation. But on the one hand, this technique is still in its era of infancy. Secondly, some bricks have been laid so incorrectly in its foundation, due to which some aspects of this edifice can never be declared as trustworthy, particularly the doctrine of Dr. Freud that the source of all psychological inclinations and motivations is generally, in some form or another, the sexual impulse. Hence, even up till now this fact remains as it was, that no criterion exists in this technique to evaluate the claims of these proponents of Kashf. This is why possessors of opposing and dissimilar outcomes are all, in their own way, claimants of reality, and no one can falsify and repudiate them. If one rebuts them, then another supports them. This is why, on this basis, they have devised this appearance of mutual conformity, that all claims are correct in their own right, the difference being only in their interpretation. For this purpose, means of gratification for the public are provided through superficial poetic metaphors and allegories. Whereas by carrying out a closer study of all these different ways and techniques, this reality emerges before us, that the mutual difference among them is not of technique and forms, but is of fact and truth. Then the difficulty is that, in this respect, the criterion for rejection and acceptance, in fact, hack and battle, is declared to be karamat, magical tricks. And it is our observation that for these things there is no condition that purification of thought is required, or rectification of deeds. As has been stated earlier, these are the manifestations of willpower which can be acquired like a technical skill. The difficulty within the difficulty is that some people remain deceived by their psyche, quite distinctly from those people who deliberately and intentionally display these kinds magic tricks, for the sake of their self-interest. And considering this willpower to be spiritual advancement, and divine nearness, become claimants of comprehension of reality. And they do not have the faintest idea that what they consider to be a garden is nothing more than a deception of color and fragrance. Extracting these people from this deception or preventing others from falling into it is a very difficult task. William James writes about these very people. In the history of Christian mysticism, the problem how to discriminate between such messages and experiences as were really divine miracles, and such others as the demon in his malice was able to counterfeit, thus making the religious person twofold more the child of hell he was before, has always been a difficult one to solve. Not only in Christianity, but this problem has been the cause for thousands of difficulties in the mysticism of every religion and still is. As has been written already, differentiation and distinguishing between Al-Kai-Rahmani and Al-Kai-Shaitani is very difficult, because of which Satanism, shrouded in great and elevated saintly veils, continues to be a robber of Iman and consciousness. And in this process of robbery, aside from the deceivers, the share of the deceived is no less. But leaving aside those people who deliberately deceive and defraud or remain deceived and cheated unwittingly, if those people are also taken into account who enjoy this with the full pleasure of their heart, even then this fact remains that this pleasure-seeking of these people is for their own self, i.e., this experience is entirely individualistic and these people have no message for mankind in their possession. They cannot launch any revolution in their world of thought and action. For them, purification of self is an objective for their own self, even though purification of the self can be neither a destination on its own nor an objective. By comprehension of reality is meant providing a solution to the question which is continuing to be the reason for 1,000 uncertainties and disorder for the world of humanity. But if some individual, through a specific discipline and control, meditation and hardships, starts to experience some states of euphoria and bliss in the world of his heart, then what is the benefit to mankind from this? Even if such an individual emerges from the lonely isolation of his hermitage, the most he can do is to inform someone else about those techniques and places through which they can also enjoy similar kinds of states of intoxication and gratification like him. But even in this situation, this experiment remains individualistic. This individualism is called monasticism, which has never launched any revolution in the world. Individualism can never present a solution for the problems of humanity. This is indeed the very reason that those religions which have considered it to be the path to comprehension of reality have had to resort to other means to solve the problems of life. It is this error that later became the cause for the dualism of deen and world, spirit and matter, as a consequence of which endless chaos was unleashed in the human system. Strengthening of the self cannot be achieved by the abandonment of desires and by severing social interactions. Instead, it is achieved by struggling against opposing and warring forces, and by overcoming and controlling them. The secret of the gleam and sharpness of a sword is not in the solitude of a scabbard but is in the blazing environments of a battlefield. Maintaining control and discipline over one's own self is essential because through this display of self-sufficiency as a moment, the greatest of the transgressing powers of the world can be overpowered and paralyzed. Not for this, to remain sitting isolated in a corner while letting them loose for all kinds of transgression and tyranny. If, for the development of the self, manifestation of the attributes of Allah is necessary, then the powerful demonstration of the rod of Moses is also a reflection of Allah's attributes of Qahar and Jabbar. And it is obvious that Allah's attributes of Qahar and Jabbar are not, Allah forbid, the onslaught of a tyrannical force, rather this is also a demand and display of his rububiyyat. Hence, whereas it is wrong to make physics alone as the focus of attention in the outer world, it is also not correct to consider only the inner world of the self to be the outer world. Development of the self takes place by the correct combination of the two. The dualism of ruh, soul, and matter, the inner and outer world, is not the maslak, way, of the Quran. Whichever philosophy of thought holds only one of these before it, it is Ashmi. From these explanations this fact has become apparent to us that the technique of Batniat mysticism also cannot become the route to comprehension of complete reality. Those highways on which there are so many misconceptions and grievous deceptions, colorful contaminations of the doubting self, and open possibilities exist for chicaneries, where it is simply not possible to differentiate between a robber and Kaiser. How can these be declared as a trustworthy technique to reach the destination of the supreme reality? If some false step is taken today in the physical world of science, then the further research of tomorrow will rectify this mistake. But such enchanting and deceptive scenes appear in the world of Batniat that man, immersed in them, has no inkling whatsoever of what deep pits of destruction and annihilation the path on which he is treading is taking him to. 8.26 Review so far. Now let us move on. However, our impression is that due to the hardship of the path, your journeying intellect may be experiencing weariness. Hence, it will be better to pause for a while before arriving at the next stage. In these moments of respite, cast another eye on the destination left behind and then see in your mind's eye where we started from and to where have we now reached. The beginning of our journey was from that point that there is a question facing man, in search of whose solution he has always remained perplexed and in pursuit. The solution to this question is not possible without comprehension of reality. The route to this comprehension is knowledge. In the world of knowledge, first of all the physical universe comes before us, where intellect reaches from the constituent parts to the whole through reasoning. Intellect also desires that it could comprehend reality. But reality is infinite, and the sphere of reasoning cannot extend beyond the finite. This is why comprehension of complete reality is not within the scope of the intellect. Unity of reality is found piecemeal in the various spheres of intellect. A complete grasp of unity cannot be obtained through this method. The second stage is that of knowledge, which is not based on reasoning, in which first of all the issue of instinct or conscience appears before us. Conscience is influenced to such an extent by the external effects of lineage and environment etc., that it simply cannot be declared as the means to differentiate between hack and battle. This is why in the world the voice of conscience never reaches one conclusion. After conscience, the valley of intuition comes before us, in which the most expansive and vast arena is that of the creativity of a genius. Intuition is the name for intensity of inclination, and differences in inclination are our daily observation. This is why intuition also cannot be declared as the criterion to differentiate between hack and battle. There is no doubt in this that a genius is at an extreme level of expertise in his skill. But it does not follow that this expertise will also influence his character in a similar fashion. This is why a genius cannot produce any revolution in the world of humanity. Hence, intuition also cannot be the means to comprehend reality. After this, the sphere of Batniat appears before us. Although its effects are about a world where reason has no place, this is an acquired skill and a means to strengthen and focus the willpower. In this, the conclusions of those who practice kashf are different and contradictory to each other. This is why, as with conscience and intuition, this knowledge is also unable to comprehend reality. Not only this, but differentiation between hack and battle is very difficult on this path. This is why the possibilities of being led astray and duped in this are far greater than other paths. Then, in addition, the experience of the practitioner is completely individual, because of which he holds no message within him for the world of general humanity, and this is why he can never become the cause for any revolution in our world of intellect and culture. Having reached this place, we had reposed a while. 8.27 Final point. Now let us proceed and turn over the pages of history once again. Before us now comes such a group of claimants of reality in whom all those balanced attributes are also present which were reflected in the people of the aforementioned groups. But apart from these, there is also a supreme attribute such as cannot be found anywhere else. History tells us that in an era when there is no sign to be found of refined thought and vision or elevated character and deeds, then there is no corner remaining in the world of human concepts and beliefs in which the misguiding armies of Iblees and the soldiers of lies, battle, of contemporary Satans have not become imposed. There is no department of life in which doubt and suspicion are not in place of iman and certainty, and in which hopelessness and transgression have not replaced righteous sermons and good judgments. Everywhere, and in every place only chaos is visible, and the eminence of humanity, having lost all of its stature and prestige, has fallen into the deep abyss of decline and debasement. In such a time, when for the discovery and exposure of reality no spark of guidance and blessing is visible in any corner of the human self or on any horizon, in this epicenter of darkness and injustice, a child is born. It is obvious that according to the rules and discipline of lineage and environment, which have been previously described, this child should also do the same as his surroundings. But those eyes that see, witness that he appears to be entirely distinct from his family and society. He is seen to abhor and be averse to all the wrong beliefs of life which are dispersed invisibly throughout the expanse of the environment like fatal germs. Right from his childhood he announces his distaste and repugnance for this wrong path of evil on which his forefathers are continuing for a long time and which is declared to be above scrutiny and critique, and research and investigation, due to the validity accorded it through ancestral religious tradition. He casts a critical eye on everything and observes everything with an inquisitive gaze. Like X-rays penetrating through all these deceptive veils, his visionary observation manages to differentiate between hack and battle. In intellect and wisdom also, he is so eminent that all the white-haired elders in the tribe and family seek his judgment and declare him as the arbitrator for the resolution of great and important matters. At the same time, neither unbridled intellect places him in any misconception nor does the voice of conscience deceive him. His birth is like that of a genius, which we have discussed in detail in the previous pages. But in contrast to an ordinary genius, he is blossoming on that most elevated stature of eminent character which serves as a criterion for supreme ethics. This character of his is extremely balanced and his life is a manifestation of complete proportion. 8.28 Genius of eminent character. In that environment in which exploitation and corruption is a principle of life, and thievery etc. is a normal way of life, he is known by the attribute of al-Amin, trustworthy. In the whole region, and even the most valuable of commodities are placed in his keeping with such confidence and trust, just as if an individual was relating a secret to his own heart. And the state of his integrity and honesty is such that when those same people knowing him to be so mean and wishing to murder him for this crime, that why does he invite them towards hack? And during one dark night they encircle his house. Then this encircled Amin is worried all night by this concern that if I exit quietly from this place, then in whose safekeeping will I hand over those goods of theirs which are in my safekeeping? The state of his honesty is such that when he invites his people for the first time towards haq and justice, standing on a hill he addresses them and says, "Tell me, if I say that on the other side of this hill there is a big army of the enemy that is advancing with a view to invading your habitations, will you accept my warning as true or not?" And all the people raise their voice as one and say, "Why should we view it as false when to this day you have never told a lie?" The state of the strength of his character is such that in the storms of opposition, When there is this demand from the enemy, that if you are true in your proclamation then produce some evidence of your veracity, he promptly replies, with immense courage, a whole lifetime before this have I tarried amongst you. Will you not then understand? 10:16. How glorious is this proclamation! And then a proclamation at what location? Among a crowd of enemies. But the powerful display of eminence of character is so electrifying that despite all oppositions, not even a whisper is raised from any corner counter to this claim. It is not only that no one says anything to his face as a result of some inner hesitation or formality, but not a single word even comes to anyone's lips against his character even behind his back. He lives a life of extreme simplicity and tranquility, and there is apparently no matter which is a cause for concern for him. But those who are able to see, observe that he remains anxious in the pursuit of a solution to some important problem. And he found you looking for guidance, and he gave you guidance. 93:7. It seems as if there is some thought and idea of great stature which is tossing and turning in the depths of his heart, but which has not yet reached the stage of manifestation of its bright potential. But the astonishing thing is this, that he himself also has no knowledge about what this thought and idea is, and of what discoveries and illuminations his heart is about to become an abode. You knew not, before, what was revelation, and what was Iman. 42:52. So much so, that that moment arrives when reality as a whole and in truth reveals itself on this chosen and righteous personality, who was being prepared for this purpose and aim. All the hidden secrets of life open up to him, and by descending into the extreme depths of the heart of the universe, he finds the solution to this question before him, in pursuit of which man, disquieted and desperate, had been journeying till then. In the words of Iqbal, the world life intuitively sees its own need, and at critical moments defines its own direction. This is what, in the language of religion, we call prophetic revelation. 8.29 The stature of Nubuwwat, the messengerhood. This is the status of messengerhood. Since the Western world is not fully conversant with the significance of the status of Nubuwwat, hence the word used among them for this is a prophet, which is definitely unable to impart the correct definition of this status. From this, the mind becomes diverted towards prophecies in which the concept of foretelling inevitably arises. There is no doubt in this that a Nabi is also aware of unseen matters within the limits of the revealed knowledge of Wahi, but this is only one aspect of the status of Nubuwwat. The correct interpretation of this status can only be through the concept of Wahi. Because the connection of Wahi is with a world beyond reasoning, hence from this respect, this and other experiences of intuition, e.g., Batniyat etc., can fall into one category. But other than this minor similarity and correlation there is nothing else in common between them. Wahi is a unique and distinct experience of its own world whose example and illustration cannot be found in any other experience. About Batniyat we have seen that it is an acquired skill. Within it, deception and trickery can keep an individual in a delusion. And it is a completely individual experience which has no relationship with the problems of collective humanity. In contrast to the above, Nubuwwat is absolutely impersonal, and in which effort and skill have absolutely no role. Furthermore, Nubuwwat is a definite and assured means of knowledge in which, leaving aside deception and error, even conjecture and guesswork have no role whatsoever. As has been noted before, on comprehending reality in totality and transcendence, he reaches the supreme loftiness of humanity where the correct and precise relationship between man with the universe and Allah becomes unveiled in the depths of his heart. Then the biggest thing of all that this experience of his is not an individual one. Instead, after this unparalleled experience he returns to the world of humanity. 8.30 A revolution-inspiring message. And by becoming a proponent of a grand revolution with dynamic energy in its lap, he infuses a new energy of life into the sleeping habitations of their thought and action, and in this way, with his unwavering Iman, which is based on the evidence witnessed by his own eyes, and through ceaseless effort, which is the tangible manifestation of this Iman, concepts of minds, angles of views, scales of things, modes of outlook and thoughts, all in all, changes the maps of the world of human selves and the external world. In order to cast light on this reality, Iqbal begins his fifth lecture with these words. Muhammad of Arabia ascended the highest heaven and returned. I swear by God that if I had reached that point, I should never have returned. These are the words of a great Muslim saint, Abdul Qudus of Gango. In the whole range of Sufi literature it will be probably difficult to find words which, in a single sentence, disclose such an acute perception of the mystic types of consciousness. The mystic does not wish to return from the repose of unitary experience. And even when he does return, as he must, his return does not mean much for mankind at large. The Prophet's return is creative. He returns to insert himself into the sweep of time with a view to control the forces of history, and thereby to create a fresh world of ideals. For the mystic the repose of unitary experience is final. For the Prophet it is the awakening, within him, of world-shaking psychological forces, calculated to completely transform the human world. The desire to see his religious experience transformed into a living world force is supreme in the Prophet. Thus his return amounts to a kind of pragmatic test of the value of his religious experience. In its creative act the Prophet's will judges both itself and the world of concrete facts in which it endeavors to objectify itself. In penetrating the impervious material before him, the Prophet discovers himself for himself, and unveils himself to the eye of history. Another way of judging the value of a prophet's religious experience, therefore, would be to examine the type of manhood that he has created, and the cultural world that has sprung out of the spirit of his message. This is a pragmatic test to verify messengerhood, by which, together with the truth of Wahi, this circumstance also becomes apparent that becoming a Nabi is not merely by chance like a genius, but is an important link in the supreme aim and plan of the system of the universe, which manifests itself exactly at its precise time for the fulfillment of a specific purpose. 8.31 For a supreme aim. In this regard, read these words of Iqbal once again, which have been quoted above, that the world life intuitively sees its own need, and at critical moments defines its own direction. This is what, in the language of religion, we call prophetic revelation. We have already seen that according to the explanations presented by Eddington, in the world of science we cannot acquaint ourselves with the reality of things, we can only become familiar with those symbols which our senses imprint on our mind. But when reality reveals itself like this, then in the light of this Wahi, the reality of things also becomes apparent to us. Eddington writes, force, energy, dimensions belong to the world of symbols. It is out of such conceptions that we have built up the external world of physics. What other conceptions have we? After exhausting physical methods we returned to the inmost recesses of consciousness, to the voice that proclaims our personality. And from there we entered on a new outlook. We have to build the spiritual world out of symbols taken from our own personality, which is based on spiritualism, beyond materialism. A Nabi brings about the creation of this new world, and then those people who make an effort to accept and reform in the light of Wahi, they become apprised of the reality and nature of these things. In this way the foundation of this world of matter is declared to be pure spirituality, through which points of view are transformed. We have seen in the sphere of conscience, intuition, and mysticism that the results of these experiences are different. The voice of conscience is different in different situations. The mutual differences and disparities of intuition, inclination, is a well-known fact. There is a clear contradiction in the revealed outcomes of mysticism. But in the world of Nubuwwat the outcomes of every experience are fundamentally and principally the same. There is no difference in them at any time or place. So much so, that even the difference in time and space can have no effect on them, because reality reveals itself totally and excellently on each one among them. This is why the experience of each one of them is the same. This is the reason that each one of them supports and authenticates the other, and together with having the truth of his proclamation accepted, he also invites acceptance of this fact that whatever were the number of Anbiya who have gone before him, they were also proclaimers of this same reality. 8.32 Status of Wahi and Intellect. The reality of Wahi has become evident before us. But the difficulty is that we generally wish to understand the nature of Wahi, which belongs totally to a world beyond reason, through intellect, i.e., reasoned knowledge. And when intellect cannot extend beyond its limits, then instead of acknowledging its limitations, doubts and suspicions are created about Wahi. Wahi is, in any case, a very supreme thing. Whereas our state is such that through reason we can neither understand nor make others understand even the most ordinary states of intuition. A few strands of metal are caused to vibrate with a plectrum, as a result of which music is created in the environment. Yet these acoustics create such a euphoric state in the world of our heart, that we can neither comprehend ourselves using intellect, nor can we explain to anyone else how and why does this happen. Hence, this principle is in itself wrong, that whatever we cannot understand using intellect, we should reject its very existence. Those people who have no ear for music can never understand until doomsday what it is that occurs through the vibration of these strings, or from some lyrics emanating from the throat that causes people to start swaying their heads in tune. As has already been written, psychologists discuss the states and effects, and environment and circumstances of the human psyche. And it is on these discussions that the whole edifice of their knowledge is being based, but until today no one has been able to determine what is the human self at the end of the day. Look into the world of physics. Everyone is in agreement about the existence of ether. Its properties and effects and displays and manifestations are on the lips of everyone. But not a word can be said about the nature of ether except that there is some unknown energy which is present everywhere. We do not mean that Wahi is something such as ether. The purpose is only to portray that this principle, that the entity whose nature we cannot determine via intellect, means that we then reject its existence, is not correct. About these people, Blaise Pascal, the French physicist, states, incomprehensive, but because you cannot understand a thing, it does not cease to exist. Now even science itself does not refute the possibility of the existence of Wahi. Samuel writes, science will not exclude the possibility of authentic messages from without. Cautious in accepting or rejecting theories within her own recognized domain, she will be even more cautious before rejecting, as well as before accepting, theories which relate to the vast region that lies, as yet, outside. Key 57. 8.33 Wahi and Science. Hence, the attitude of science regarding Wahi is now an attitude of caution, not of open denial. Let time move forward, this caution will gradually turn into acceptance. The fact is that tales of the confrontation between Wahi and intellect, i.e., religion and science, are reminiscences of the era of infancy of human knowledge. Wahi can never be critical of knowledge and intellect, science, as we have seen, is an inadequate or deficient technique for the comprehension of reality, and Wahi is the total and complete. About this difference, Iqbal writes, "But we must not forget that what is called science is not a single systematic view of reality. It is a mass of sectional views of reality, fragments of a total experience which do not seem to fit together. Natural science deals with matter, with life, and with mind. But the moment you ask the question how matter, life, and mind are mutually related, you begin to see the sectional character of the various sciences that deal with them and the inability of these sciences, taken singly, to furnish a complete answer to your question." At another place he writes, "Science must necessarily select for study certain specific aspects of reality only and exclude others. It is pure dogmatism on the part of science to claim that the aspects of reality selected by it are the only aspects to be studied. No doubt man has a spatial aspect. But this is not the only aspect of man. There are other aspects of man, which science must necessarily exclude from its study, and the understanding of which requires categories other than those employed by science." Professor Eddington explains this reality in the following words. "We have acknowledged this point that the entities of physics can from their very nature form only a partial aspect of the reality. How are we to deal with the other part? It cannot be said that the other part concerns us less than the physical entities. Feeling, purpose, values, make up our consciousness as much as sense impressions. We follow up the sense impressions and find that they lead into an external world discussed by science. We follow up the other elements of our being and find that they lead not into world of space and time, but surely somewhere. From this it is apparent that science only discusses one aspect of reality, therefore its sphere is restricted. But contrary to this, Dean Wahi views reality in totality and completely. Therefore, within this whole, the section of the world of science becomes included automatically." Iqbal sums it up. "Thus religion, which demands the whole of reality and for this reason must occupy a central place in any synthesis of all the data of human experience, has no reason to be afraid of any sectional views of reality." Other than this, Dean also goes beyond the world of science from another aspect. The aim of science is only this, that it can establish conceptions about things. Details of this have already been covered. Contrary to this, religion, Dean, is not satisfied with mere conception. It seeks a more intimate knowledge of and association with the object of its pursuit. Science only provides information, whereas the aim of Wahi is not only to provide information about reality but also that the human self should keep developing in such a way that the divine attributes, within the constraints of being human, should reflect in it. Through information science produces greater understanding about the possibilities of harnessing nature, but through the means of Wahi the human self becomes that which knows no limits. 8.34 Wahi and monasticism. When the world of physics itself is included within the domain of Wahi, Dean, then the doctrine of monasticism cannot be declared to be based on reality. The teaching of monasticism is in fact predicated on a false ideology of the dualism of ruh and matter. Its teaching is that the evolution of the human ego is connected with the discipline and organization of its inner world. It has no relationship with the forces of the external world. But the proclamation of Wahi is that this section of this ideology is accurate, but along with this it is necessary to add that the internal world which manifests itself within man is not an opponent of the external world, instead it is absorbed within the veins and arteries of the world of matter. Therefore, strengthening of the human ego will not occur by abandoning the forces of the world of matter, rather will be through the mutual harmony and support of the internal world and the external world. Wahi awakens that higher consciousness of man from which he learns what is his relationship with Allah and the universe. When man understands the meanings of this relationship correctly, he then establishes such a system according to it, in which all of these forces are employed to bring this objective to fruition, which is the demand of the fountainhead of life. In this way, his hand becomes the hand of Allah. Iqbal writes, "Of all the creations of God, he alone is capable of consciously participating in the creative life of his Maker. Endowed with the power to imagine a better world, and mold what is into what ought to be." 8.35 Aim and aspiration. What is and what ought to be. This can only be ascertained in the event that man can discover the reality of the different things of the universe, and it is not possible for this to happen without the light of Wahi. This is because without it there is no other means by which reality as a whole can be comprehended. This is that light by which man, stepping into the depths of the heart of the universe, spans all of its expanses. At this point he first of all develops awareness of the reality of his self, and in this way this fact becomes revealed to him that, in truth, only that world is real which has direct consciousness of its own reality. Through this man recognizes himself in the status of a human being. In this way, all aspects of his life become illuminated. In this way, Wahi provides guidance for him in all the departments of his life. According to Iqbal, religion is not a departmental affair. It is neither mere thought, nor mere feeling, nor mere action. It is an expression of the whole man. 8.36 Secret to Self-Realization. Let us glance once again at the first page of the topic under review. You will see that the human ego was desirous of a mortal life. It did not wish self-annihilation. It was fearful of the idea of extinction. Iblees directed him towards the tree of immortality, and in this way informed him that the issue of survival can be resolved through physical sciences, reasoning, and man can live forever through his progeny. Contrary to this, the heavenly voice proclaimed that this is an invitation to misguidance, a call towards annihilation. The secret of the realization of the self lies elsewhere. Whosoever follows my guidance, on them shall be no fear, nor shall they grieve. 2:38. If you wish to be at peace from the fear of ruin and destruction, then there is only one way for that, to spend life according to the guidance sent from my direction. This will take you to an abode of peace and security, wherewith Allah guides all who seek his good pleasure to ways of peace and safety. 5:16. Cast an eye on human history, it will appear as a tale of this continuous struggle as to whether glad tidings of success through knowledge based on reasoning, human intellect alone, can help to achieve paradisiacal life, or is there also a requirement for the illuminating voice of the Wahi of Allah for this? What did the claimants of reasoning intellect do? Firstly, using intellect alone, they determined what is the problem facing humanity, and then also desired to find the solution to this problem using human intellect. You will note that knowledge based on reasoning did not even visualize the human problem beyond physical life, because knowledge based on reasoning is in itself finite, and its vision simply cannot see beyond the boundaries of the finite. It has never even appreciated the status of a human being from the point of view of being human. This is why whichever system he established, instead of meeting the needs of the human self, it became imposed as a hell of discontent and anxiety. Contrary to this, the light of Wahi guided him to that path which takes him with balance and beauty to that paradise whose springs are unfamiliar with autumn, and whose splendors never witness sorrow, with rivers flowing beneath their eternal home. 4:57.